Hey beautiful people, what is up and welcome back to the channel. Welcome to today's video. Y'all, this video has been on my mind for so long. I was actually talking to my girl Kara about it because I have been dying to film a video talking about some spicy neutral eyeshadow palettes. Yes, I know that is a little counterintuitive. It doesn't make a ton of sense, but hold on, I'm gonna get there. Now this video is actually inspired by the brand new Adept Flying Fiddles palette. I did film with this. That video will probably be up after this one, so just give me a minute. I just have no time to edit. But I was inspired by this palette overall because when the brand sort of launched the color story for this, they described this as their version of a neutral palette, which I think if any person looks at this, they're gonna be like, this is not a neutral palette. And they'd be right. So I started calling it a spicy neutral eyeshadow palette. If you watch any of my new makeup releases videos, you would have seen that that's what I started referring to this as. Because it does have neutral attributes. It does have the option to go neutral, but it just has these little pops and sprinkles of a little substance. A little bit of herbs, a little bit of cayenne, a little bit of chili. You know what I mean. It just has a little bit something extra that gives it some va-va-voom and makes the palette a little bit more versatile. Now, I am somebody that kind of like sits in the indie space for I've been sitting here for a very long time, and I've always enjoyed indie eyeshadow, but sometimes it can be very, very colorful, and it just can be a little bit too much. And quite frankly, my tastes have been leaning a little bit more to the neutral side of things. But I don't want it to just be the basic boring neutrals that we get everywhere else. I've been interested in neutrals that give us a little bit something extra. So I wanted to actually go into my collection, pull out my spicy neutral palettes, and just show you guys 10 palettes that I think can give you the option to be very neutral, but also have a little bit of kick in there that if you want to amp things up a little bit, you can add a little bit of extra to your look and it's not going to look over the top. So that's going to be the theme for today's video. Now, before we dive in, if this is your first time watching me, welcome. I'm Jamila. On my little corner of the interwebs, I like to share high-end luxury indie makeup, but from the perspective of somebody who does not, and I mean does not, believe in paying full price for makeup. So if that sounds like your cup of tea, if you like hearing all the tips, tricks, and best practices to save money, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, join the fam. And without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into today's video. So let's start off with the one that inspired this, and that has to be, like I said, the Adept Flying Fiddles palette. Now, when I saw the color story, I was like, I know they're not trying to say that this is neutral, because it is not. And the brand really said with this whole chest that this is their version of a neutral palette. Is it neutral? Absolutely not. Does it have the ability to create neutral looks? Yes. And I want to show you guys like up close, because I think that that we have this matte, and this matte. And I think once you have the neutral grounding mattes, you can absolutely create a more neutral leading look. And then quite frankly, for the majority of the shimmers, like we have these two, these three, you can get just sort of the basic neutral leading looks. But if you want to amp things up, then you have the green, the blue, the teals, this multi-chrome that actually shifts green and pink. And I think you have the option to get a little bit more color, a little bit more, you know, va-va-voom in there. And they did give us one blue matte. So if you did want to add even more color, you could put it in the matte. But I think that the fact that we have primarily neutral leaning shimmers, which in my opinion, if you ground a look with neutral leaning, mattes, if you ground a look with neutral leaning mattes, you will have the option to have just a straight up neutral leaning look. And I did think that they chose pretty solid neutral leaning shimmers to go with it. Like these are just sort of like your basic, lovely, just kind of like coppery gold tones that you can create a very toned down look very easily with this palette. The second spicy neutral palette that came to mind like immediately for me was the Fantasy Cosmetica Fighter palette. Now, Fantasy Cosmetica and Adept, those are both brands that I'm affiliates in, so sometimes I get PR. Fantasy Cosmetica, I pretty much always get their PR. I haven't gotten PR from Adept in a while, but what I'm trying to say is that I do have affiliate codes with them, so if you shop using my code, you save some money and I get a small commission, so just want to be transparent about that. But the Fighter palette, this was one that came out last year, and if you watched my top 10 palettes of 2023, you know how I feel about this palette. This is one of the best of the best of the best. And this palette, yes, it does feel very like stereotypical neutral, but quite frankly, it's not. It really does have a little bit of something extra in there. And one of the reasons why I love this palette so much, and I talk about it in my original review, is one, the fact that you have the option to go warm, because you have a very nice warm column here. You have the option to go cool, because you have the cool tone gray leaning mattes. And you have these two kind of shimmers, you have these two shimmers that are like coppery, reddish, definitely more stereotypical neutrals. You have a purple leaning shimmer, but not too purple. I mean, it does give a little bit of grunge, and it doesn't have too much color to it, so it doesn't look as stark. And then you have a blue leaning silver. That's where that Vava Voom comes in. And this really beautiful blue, kind of like purpley green, multi-chrome shade. So I love that you have the option to go warm tone, cool tone, a little bit of blue, neutral, purple, all of that in a 9-pan palette. Like, that is wild that they were able to give us so much versatility in this palette, which is honestly so small. And this blue gray shimmer, y'all, this is stunning. I remember I wore this to a coffee shop near me, and I got so much compliments. It was so darn pretty. Like, do you see that? Oh my gosh. But like I said, the name of the game is neutrals. So at the end of the day, when I want like a basic neutral look, I'm going for this kind of like gold coppery shade here. And I am pairing that with any of these mattes, because typically I would pair it with the warm mattes to, you know, just have like a very, very warm basic look. But even if I wanted to take the cool toned deep matte, I could pair it with that and come up with a very, very simple basic look as well. And I don't know if you guys can see, but the shimmers in this are actually very, very smooth. So when you like put them on the lids, it doesn't have a crazy amount of texture. And that's the other thing too with spicy neutral palettes, or just like what I had to think about it, is that keeping it in that neutral vein is not simply the neutral colors, but the fact that you have textures that are just a little bit softer, a little bit less impactful, a little bit more everyday friendly, business friendly, corporate friendly. And I love that these shimmers are on that softer, smoother side. But if you want to amp it up, I go back to this first shimmer here, which has much larger glitter particles in there, so you can actually get like even more shine if you were to like top it with this. So one of my absolute favorite palettes for 2023 for good reason. And if you are somebody that is trying to get into indie but it's too much, this is the perfect palette for you to start with. Now the next two palettes I'm going to talk about, I'm pretty sure you can't get any more, so I'm just going to sneak them in the middle so that you guys are not mad at me at the end. And the first one is going to be the Rusted Essence palette from Notoriously Morbid. Oh my god, this one, this is such a beautiful palette. Now this is definitely a little bit more bold than the others, I will fully admit that. And it doesn't have like the true neutral mattes to ground it like you can get with the other palettes. But I do think that it kind of makes up for that in the shimmers, in some sense. And even though the mattes that they chose for this are a lot more colorful than the first two I showed you guys, I still think that they lean neutral enough that you can get away with it. Now, I will say that this is a kind of like pink plummy matte, so it is a little bit harder to get it to be a true neutral, but I do think it's workable. I think you can work it. And then you have very standard neutral shades. Now they do tend to lean a little bit more warm, a little bit more orange, but I love that they gave us this middle shade, which to me is like a very, very beautiful everyday kind of just neutral leaning shimmer. And quite frankly, if you were to pair that plummy matte shade with this shade, just these two together, bam, boom, basic neutral look. But if you want a little bit more, if you want a little bit extra, you can go in with some of the brighter oranges. Now, orange, I tend to consider a neutral shade because because I'm a little bit more yellow golden, I feel like orange shades just tend to look a little bit more natural on me. Now, you may need to keep that in account based on your undertone, based on your skin tone, if it's going to look like too much for you. But I feel like for me personally, I can get away with an orange without it being too over the top. Like, I feel like I could pair this orange shade with the matte shade and still have that look very natural, very neutral, very everyday friendly on my skin tone. And the other thing too with this palette is I think that you can in a lot of ways get away with this, especially if you're wearing it in the fall. Now these are very, very fall colors. You know, all of the shades here represent what the leaves look like as they're changing. That being, and because of that, I think that if you were to wear this palette in the fall, it tends to lean even more neutral and feel more natural, because you're basically wearing the shades of the environment. You're wearing the shades of what is around you. So like, I feel like it borders the cusp of being very colorful, but it can be worked. It can be shimmied, it can be finagled, like I showed you guys, into a very simple, very basic, neutral leaning look, but with the option to amp things up and add a little bit of extraness. And quite frankly, when you have these kind of spicy neutral palettes, one of the things I recommend doing is not doing too much. You guys already know, I'm somebody that likes to have 3-4 matte shades with 2-3 shimmers on top of it. That is not necessarily something you want to do if you're going for something that's a little bit more natural, a little bit more wearable. Keep it simple. Honestly, blend this out and then deepen it up in where you need to, and then plop one shade of them. Simple, wearable look. But if I were to start mixing and melding and blending these all together with some of the other shades here, that's when you get the extraness. And sometimes you want the simple, sometimes you want the extra. So that's just a tip that I feel like I've learned when it comes to working with spicy neutrals, in terms of how to amp things up versus tone things down. Okay, the second palette that I told you guys that was discontinued, NARS Climax, baby. I feel like this palette needed to be a permanent palette. 99.98% of the time, NARS comes out with the exact same palette, the exact same color story. And I don't know who woke up one day and chose violence at the NARS headquarters and gave us this. Because the Climax palette is the best thing I have seen come out of NARS in a very, very, very long time. Now, you can already tell it does have those neutral shades that I be talking about. And I will say that this one, I think, leans a lot cooler. So when it comes to the neutrals, I think that this is one that works very well across all skin tones. And I think a lot of people like this. I personally really appreciated how these cool tones were created, in that they weren't too cool that they look terrible on me. Like I said, I'm someone with a warm undertone. I'm very golden, I'm very orange, I'm very yellow. So if something is too cool, too gray, it makes me look a little sick. It makes me look a little casket ready, which is why I tend to be very hesitant about cool tone palettes just in general. But the way in which these are structured, the way in which these blend, the way in which these show up on my complexion, chef's kiss. I don't want to spend too much time on this because it's discontinued, so don't fight me, fight your mama. Just kidding. But you might be able to find this on a Macari or something. So if you can, I definitely recommend you picking it up. So this is one that barely is spicy, but I do think that it adds some spiciness because, one, the formula in this is just chef's kiss. I think that this is such a beautiful, sparkly, just shimmery formula. Sorry, that's my alarm going off from my crab cakes in the oven. So it has like a very beautiful shimmery texture, shimmery formula. Let's swatch that here. That you can like press it into the lids and have it be a little bit smoother. But if you want a little bit of extraness, if you just tap it on ever so lightly, you get those brighter, shinier particles. And for the color, which is where I think a lot of spiciness comes in, you have a blue and a green shimmer. So you can spice up this palette by either taking the blue and the green, using them on their own, and they're not too over the top when it comes to colorful blue, colorful green. You'll see even the blue is like a silvery kind of blue, and the green is just like an army green. So by themselves, they're really pretty. They can still lean somewhat neutral. But if you, again, once you start mixing and matching multiple shades, you start amping up the spiciness. So I just think that this was such a phenomenal, like such a beautiful release from NARS. And I wish they would come up with more like this that kind of like toes the line and gets us away from some of the pinky shades. Because I don't know, I feel like we get, like, Patricia gets a lot of slack for her pink palettes, rightfully so, but the reality is NARS be doing the same thing, Charlotte be doing the same thing, and so on and so forth. So, but this was a winner. We need more of this. Okay, so the next palette is available, and that is the Natasha Denona My Dream palette. Now, Tasha has her many flaws, and y'all know I will read Tasha from here to Thy Kingdom Come as appropriate. But she did her thing when it comes to the My Dream palette. This was one that I was like hemming and hawing on because it kind of seems very basic, if we're being honest. Just looking at it straight on, it feels basic and it actually feels very rose. But once you start playing with the shimmers, applying them to your lids, and you really get into it, you realize that one, you have the option to do rosy tone looks, especially with the cream to matte powder formula here, this multi-chrome here that is that kind of green, purple, rose shade. But you can get neutral. So this shade here, warm tone neutral. This shade here, like true neutral, kind of leaning cool tone. You have a peachy shade, another brown, and then you have like a true neutral brown here. And you also have a black. So you can also deepen up any of the matte shades that I talked about. And when you get into the shimmers, neutral, 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 neutral. And then this one is where you get a little bit of extraness, a little extra spiciness. Y'all know how I feel about my orange shimmers. So you get a little extraness with this kind of like spicy orange duochrome. And if you want to get even more spicy, like I said, we have this multi-chrome, which quite frankly, this shift in multi-chromes is one of the most wearable shifts when it comes to multi-chromes. So you can wear this and still not be over the top, still have this even be work appropriate, depending on, you know, situation and whatnot. But I love the fact that you can keep it super basic, because if I were to swatch, let me just swatch this shade, which is just a standard shimmer. You could wear that to it easy peasy. Or this shade. And you can see there are different levels of sparkle in these shimmers. On a lighter complexion, easy peasy. So you can wear so many of these shades as like everyday work appropriate shades. And then when you get to these two, you can spice it up. And of course, mixing and matching, like I said, that's how you get real spicy neutrals. So, and then the last thing that I want to flag when it comes to the Natasha Denona My Dream palette is that this is one of the few palettes in Natasha's lineup where for deeper complexions, you can use every single shade. Or at least for my complexion. Because I don't want to speak for all people of deeper complexions. I'm a medium deep complexion. And I know that it goes deeper than me. It goes deep, dark, very dark. I'm in the medium deep range. And I will say for me, every single one of those shades are usable. And that's not something I can say for every single Natasha Denona palette. So I was floored by this palette knowing that I could use every single shade. So if you are looking for a nice palette from Natasha Denona that gives you the option to be neutral, gives you the option to be spicy, quite frankly, this is probably the first one I would recommend just overall. Because it's also one of the most versatile. Because y'all know Natasha likes to give us those monochromatic palettes. I think that this is an amazing palette, especially if you are a deeper complexion and you want a spicy neutral palette. Alright, let me go check on the oven so I don't burn my crab cakes, and I'll be right back. Okay, so it needs another like 5 minutes or so, so let's keep going, and I'm going to try to get through the rest of these as quickly as I possibly can. Next up is a palette that I'm pretty sure is still available, but I also don't know what's going on with the brand, so here's a couple of caveats with it. And that is the Alma Beauty Freedom Palette. Y'all, first and foremost, if you're looking for Pat McGrath type shadows without paying Pat McGrath price, the quality in this, the feel, the texture, everything in this reminded me so much of Pat McGrath shimmers. Not spot on, because I have never found anybody able to do Patricia, and Patricia is just like, she's Patricia. But this comes close, you guys, and is like more than half the price. So I definitely think that you should try the Freedom palette if you have not already done so. You can already tell the reason why this is on this list is because, one, you get all of the grounding mattes that you need. Cool tones, warm tones, all of the browns that you need, and a black in case you need to deepen things up. And then you get the mattes, the shimmers, which give you the option to go neutral. Like, you can keep it real neutral here. But then you have these multi-chrome shimmers. And they all have a little bit of like a brown peachy shift to it. These two here have a very brown peachy shift to it, which allows you to keep it somewhat neutral. And the thing about this palette, the Freedom palette, I remember when I tried this, I was like, ooh, these are pretty. But quite frankly, the shifts in these are not too much, which means that if you need something that is a little bit more work appropriate, that isn't going to do too much, like you can see, this is a very wearable shade. Both of these are very wearable shades. And there's a subtle shift to it that people will be like, oh, what's that? Without being like, ooh, your eyes are doing too much. So that's what I mean by this can be a very spicy neutral palette, in that it gives you the option to keep it neutral, but you can amp it up a lot. And if you wanted to keep it just dry without any like shiftiness to it, like I said, this shade here, standard neutral. It doesn't do too much of anything. It would work across multiple skin tones. Very, very wearable, very everyday friendly. And you even have like a basic silver. So depending on if you're going for something that's a little bit more cool toned, there you go. You have that silver shade. See? Perfection. And going back to what I said at the beginning, this one is not discontinued, but I don't know what's going on with Alma Beauty. So I don't know how available this is. If you are able to pick it up at Ulta, that's the only place I would recommend that you pick this up. Don't buy it on the website. Don't buy it anywhere else, because I think that there's a lawsuit. There's something going on with the brand that I am not well informed about. And this is over the purchase of the brand. So I don't want you guys to lose your money. And I think the only safe way to pick this up right now is at the Ulta website. Just saying. Next up in the Spicy Neutrals list is the Tiny Marvels palette from Sydney Grace. You guys know how I feel about Sydney Grace. One of my favorite brands, hand out, especially in the indie space. They have one of the best formulas, just generally. And I think that the Tiny Marvels palette, which was created by our dear Mel Thompson, I remember the first time I saw this, I was like, what am I supposed to do with that? But Lord knows Mel had vision. Mel had vision. She knew what she was doing. And this palette is one that I think stands the test of time and is one of the most timeless palettes in my collection. And also one of the most versatile palettes, because you get literally everything that you need to be neutral but spicy. So let's go into it again, like we've been doing. So you get those neutral leaning mattes, you guys. So you especially this matte brown. That deep matte brown is going to ground all of your looks. Spicing it up, you have some very lovely, colorful shimmers, but they're very soft. One thing about like these kind of like pastel leaning shades from Sydney Grace, they're not too much, they're not over the top, and they blend nicely, and I think that they work well on multiple skin tones. Just saying. And Sydney Grace always, also gives us the option to go light and deep, so something to think about. When we look at the shimmer choices here, we have a kind of rose gold option, a very soft, almost satin-like, just sort of neutral leaning. It is on the lighter side, so if you are my complexion, this might be a bit icy on us. But then I love that we have this peachy shade here, and I think even the multichrome that was chosen, this is one that is like a standard multichrome that we see everywhere, but I think it's one of the most wearable multichromes as well. Like when you really blend this out, I think it's such a pretty kind of like gray, peachy, pinky multichrome. And this is actually going to show up in the last palette that we'll show you guys too. So this shift, I should say. But I just love that you have the option to just create a standard brown leaning look with, the brown mattes. You have the option to go a little bit purple in it or peach. And then for good measure, Mel gave us standard yellow gold. Like you can't go wrong with like a straight up yellow gold, right? That is as spicy as it gets. So I think just generally speaking, this is a versatile palette. It's one that I think stands the test of time. One that is extremely wearable, gives you the option for neutral, colorful even, and then spicy neutral. So one of my absolute favorite palettes, and I'm just so glad that is like a staple in the Sydney Grace lineup. The next two palettes are relatively new to my collection, but are quite loved. And first up, we have the Yucca palette from Natasha Denona. Yes, Tasha's making a double appearance. Like I said, I'd be giving Natasha smack, but I will give her credit where credit is due. And this is a beautiful spicy neutral palette. And I put this one in here because not only is it like just beautiful in general, I think that this is a really nice option for my olive undertoned folks. My friend Colin Quaybones, they have this palette, and I know that they are an olive undertone. And when I saw them use this, the looks that they were able to create just looked spectacular. And you could tell the difference when looking at someone with a like yellow golden undertone like me using it versus they using it, and they have that sort of olive undertone to it. So if you are olive undertone, I think you're gonna really like this one. I think it's a great option for that skin tone. Now, if you're golden, we can still use this too. Never fear, because again, we have those very nice brown mattes that we can use. The only thing I wish is that we had something that's a little bit deeper. This one, it is kind of on the green side and green gray almost. So again, if you are that sort of golden undertone, it is going to lean a little gray on us, just saying. It's going to give a little bit of gray, but it's not too bad where it's unwearable. So, and the only, I will say that this one does need a little bit more depth to it, because the cream to powder formula in the Natasha Denona palette, it definitely applies, it applies lighter than it looks in the pan. So this looks really deep, but on the eyes, not super deep. And then the other two deep shades are definitely green. So something to keep in mind. But what really stands out here for me are the shimmers. These shimmers are beautiful. They're wet, they're reflective. And yes, they do a little bit much for like a straight neutral office wearable look. Like they do have a little bit more shine to them. But if you take your time, don't apply too much, kind of press them into the lid, you can get a more wearable look. Like, so this shade gives like a very, very kind of cool toned neutral leaning look. Sorry, the sun is out and it's just giving too much right now. So that is an option. And then spicing it up, you do have Plantasia, which is a really beautiful multi-chrome shade, you guys. Like this, oh my gosh, stunning. I'm running out of space on my arms. Hold on. So pretty. So like, I think the shimmers in here are true standouts, but they definitely have the option to be kind of neutral leaning, especially this one, which I think is a very, very unique, kind of like cool toned, grungy shimmer that I think works well on like an everyday work office vibe. Okay, 2 palettes left, and then I'm gonna go because lunch is calling. So next up, I had to include the Ghost Town palette from Nomad Cosmetics. First and foremost, just pause to appreciate the lenticular packaging because it's so cute. This is also relatively new for me. It came out during Halloween of 2023. And this palette, oh my god, it completely blew me away. Pretty sure I did 3 looks with this because I love how they've broken this down into almost 6 pans. So I think that one, if you were to cover this half of the palette or this 2/3 of the palette and just focus on these 6 shades, there you have those basic neutrals. Then if you cover these 6 and these 6, you have this kind of blue leaning row, but this is a neutral leaning shade. So you can pair this with any one of these mattes, have a neutral leaning option. And then if you cover this 2/3 of the palette, you have the kind of green options, but this is also like a neutral grayish kind of option that I think is definitely more neutral leaning. I think that when you really look at the shimmers, outside from like the straight green and this straight purple, these can give you very neutral leaning looks, you know? So like, I think we can see very clearly how the brown shimmer roll gives a very neutral leaning. And this one that I just swatched, this smoky quartz, which I'm now realizing that this is like a hollow chrome. So it has some sparkle in there. So like, you can use this to give you a little bit more spiciness to it. Like, you can't really see the sparkle in there, but it does have some rainbow sparkle in there, which I think is like a nice surprise, you know? And then you have this like blue leaning silver. Oh, I love that. That is very wearable in my opinion. And of course, like I said, you have all of these kind of like brown leaning mattes that help you make sure that you keep things very, very neutral leaning. And, you know, Nomad gives us depth. So there's the option to have this be lighter or to create something that's a little bit more smoky. But generally speaking, I think the Nomad formula is one of my favorites in general because, one, you get a lot of depth with it, but also the option to keep things nice and light if you need to. And the shimmers are smooth enough that if you need something that doesn't have a crazy amount of sparkle, you can really press them into the skin and they just don't look over the top. Like, these look like very smooth shimmers on my hand, and that's how they apply to my lids, especially because I apply my shimmers with a finger. Now, I am an affiliate with Nomad. Again, code is Jamila. You can save 10%. And for a lot of these palettes that I'm showing you guys, I do have reviews or videos on them. So I will try to remember to link all of them down below so you can check those out. As well as any discount codes if you saw a palette that piqued your interest and you wanted to pick it up. Those are more likely than not affiliate links. So I do earn a small commission. That being said, drum roll please. We are here for palette number 10. And you know You already know. I have to give palette number 10, and this is not a rankings, but to the Pat McGrath Moonlit Seduction palette. Oh my gosh. Did you guys think I would do a video and not talk about Patricia? Ain't no way. Ain't no way. Patricia, as you know, as much as the brand, I don't know what's going on, we can't say anything bad about her quality. You can't fight me on that. Just saying. We can't say anything bad about her quality. And quite frankly, I know people were disappointed with the Moonlit Seduction palette. But y'all, and I know I need to do a ranking of my motherships, this palette skyrocketed to new heights for me. At first I was like, really, Pat? Really, Patty? This is what we doing, Patricia? Auntie? Mama? Whatever you call her. But she knew what she was doing. This is one of the best motherships in her lineup. And I think that the reason why this stood out for me is that I know a lot of people think that you have the kind of pinky leaning mattes, but this is actually a pretty cool toned palette. And when it comes to cool tones, like I've said before, I'm very uncomfortable because I'm a warm golden yellow undertone. So cool tones can look a little sickly on me. But given that Pat McGrath is a black owned brand and she is a deep skinned woman, I should have known. Patricia will never let us down. Patricia is always here for the girls with the melanin, just saying. And she came through. And this is when I got like a really like deeper appreciation for cool tones. This palette I wore for my birthday. Whenever I have like a special occasion now lately, this is the palette that I reach for. I have the biggest divot in this shade, which is going to look familiar because remember that Sydney Grace palette that I showed you guys? This has like a very, very similar, if not identical, flip to it, but in the Pat McGrath formula. And y'all know when Patricia gives us formula, Patricia sparkles just look a little bit different on the lids. So this is such a beautiful shade, one that I've been wearing for special occasions, and quite frankly, I don't find it to be over the top. I think that this is wearable. Now, maybe it's not going to be a work thing, just saying, I understand that, but I do think it adds a little bit of spice to this palette. Now, going back into the neutral side of things, we get the standard Pat McGrath golds that, you know, always come in her palette. And of course, because it's Pat, we have the option to do her special shades or like her regular shimmers. So like these two have a lot more sparkle to them, just off the jump because they are her special shades. So you see a lot more sparkle in these two. This one is a much smoother texture because this is one of her regular shimmer formulas. So if you wanted to amp things up, sparkle, sparkly, sparkly, sparkly. Or you could just start off with her regular shimmers, which tend to like feel a little bit more satin-like. So you can wear them as a satin, and you can also blend them out if you just wanted to put a one and done. Like I found that Pat McGrath regular shimmer shades blend out absolutely beautifully. So like you see, spicy, neutral. And you have the standard mattes to ground it. And we didn't even swatch all of the shades, you guys. And the thing too about this is that you get the option to do like the regular kind of brown, at least for me, that's what I think about, like the golds. But then because you have this multi-chrome shade, as well as a like silver here, you can even change the kind of like undertone and the sparkle by adding this kind of like white, purple, silver reshade to add a little bit more spiciness to your look as well. So this, and trust me, I could have picked, you know, Subversive, Moonlit Seduction, this is Moonlit Seduction. What's the green one? Ooh, I'm blanking on that one. But there's what is that one called? There are a number of Pat McGrath motherships that I could have picked, but that one has been living rent-free in my mind for so long. And like I said, it's the one that I've been reaching for every time I need to do like a special occasion. So I'm going to go ahead and stop there. Those are the top 10, well, not top 10, but those are my 10 spicy neutral eyeshadow palettes. I really had a fun time pulling those out of my collection. Honestly, now I want to hear from you guys. Do you have palettes that you consider to be spicy neutrals in your collection? Leave those down in the comments below. If you don't know what to comment, let's leave, I'm pretty sure this is an emoji somewhere, but if they have like a little hot pepper emoji, like a little spicy pepper or a flame, because we on spice now. So either leave flames or like a hot pepper emoji, if that emoji exists. I don't know, y'all. Leave that down in the comments below. And then lastly, I'm actually going to be tagging a couple of creators that I want to see do this video, because I want to know what they would choose as spicy neutrals, you know? I am looking to, explore more in my collection, but really more in that neutral vein. So I'd love to hear from others what their thoughts are when it comes to neutral leaning palettes, or palettes that have the option to give you something neutral, something more colorful, that's just a little bit more versatile, but always with like a neutral lens or neutral focus. Anyways, that's it for today's video, guys. Thank you so much for watching me. I just want to tell you guys I appreciate you so much more than you know. Hit like, comment, subscribe, follow, all that fun jazz. As always, I appreciate you more than you know, and I'll catch you in my next one. Bye.